property?
Yeah.
Well, all right, guys, we're back again tonight with Daniel chapter 8. And we're going to look at the 70-week prophecy. No, actually, I think that's next week. This will be the ram and the goat vision that Daniel had. And so we'll go ahead and get started. This chapter, time-wise, falls between the fall of Babylon, which we saw in chapter 5, and after this chapter, we'll be looking at the 70-week prophecy. So this is looking at a period which fell between the Old Testament and the New Testament, that they call the dark or the silent days. Malachi ended the Old Testament. This took place in that 400-year window, and then the New Testament began. So as a point of reference as well, chapter 2, verses 4 up through chapter 7, verse 28 are all written in Aramaic or Chaldean, and they deal with the times of the Gentiles, these 4 nations or empires that were in control. In chapter 8 through 12, it's all in Hebrew because it all focuses on Israel. It was just interesting that Daniel, living in both cultures, knew both languages and was able to do that. Plus, Nebuchadnezzar wrote part of it. So the focus here is going to be returning to Israel. And tonight we're going to see the Medes and the Persians and also the Greeks, and both in or as they pertain to Israel. If you remember in Nebuchadnezzar's dream, the silver and the bronze, the silver was the Medes and Persians, and the bronze was the picture of Alexander the Great and his kingdom. In Daniel, he sees a ram and a goat. In John in Revelation sees a bear and a leopard. They all refer to the second and third great kingdoms, Mede, Persia, and Greece. So it was interesting to me. The World, I read this week, has a list of the 1,000 greatest people ever. And guess who isn't on it? Daniel, Joseph, John the Baptist, Paul, not even me. None made the cut. And I guess it depends whether you're a Christian or a worldly person. These 4 people are high on my list of greats, and I can't wait to meet them. But interesting, this week I found a Chinese proverb that said, great men never know that they're great. And so maybe that's why there's a difference. So this is another one of those that has dual prophecies, even in the same small section or passage. And it points to the days of the Medes and Persians and Greece, but also to the very end, the tribulation time. The first half has now been fulfilled 100% accurately. And the second half is, I think, is just about ready to happen. So as we get started, Daniel 8, verse 1, it says, in the 3rd year of the reign of King Belshazzar. So this would have been about 551 BC, shortly before his end, when the Medes and Persians broke through under the walls of Babylon and put him to death. Daniel says, a vision appeared to me, Daniel, which I love this. He tells everybody who claims he didn't write it that, hey, it's me, Daniel. And Jesus even confirms that this is Daniel the prophet in the New Testament. And I just say this because so many people claim Daniel couldn't have written this because it's so accurate. Well, that's because God wrote it. After the one that appeared to me the first time, so after his first vision, I saw in the vision, and it so happened that while I was looking, I was in Shushan, the citadel, which is roughly 230 miles southeast of Babylon, which is in Iraq. It's south of Baghdad, where most of us know where that is. It's about 150 miles north of the Persian Gulf. So for you geography buffs, and then for Bible students, it was also the home of Esther. And it's within the province of Elam, which is in Persia, Iran. And I saw in the vision that I was by the river Ulai. Then I lifted my eyes and saw, and there, standing beside the river or the canal, literally, was a ram which had two horns. We know this is Mede and the Medes and Persians. And we'll see that later on. And the two horns were high, but one was higher than the other. And the higher one came up last. So remember when we looked at this before, Nebuchadnezzar's statue and Daniel's vision, we had a bear on its side on Daniel's vision. And once it was lopsided, one side was higher than the other, or an imbalance, because the Persians were stronger than the Medes. So it's a picture of this Mede and Persian empire. And I saw the ram pushing westward, in other words, towards Greece and Macedonia. They actually went in and almost destroyed Greece. This is why Alexander the Great hated them so much. And then they moved northward into Russia, Afghanistan, and the surrounding areas. And then they moved southward, which is interesting. This is the exact order they conquered: Babylon Empire and then North Africa. So Greece, Babylon, North Africa. So that no animal could withstand him. Now he's talking about the ram as a him. It's the leader of the Mede Persians. Nor was there any that could deliver from his hand, but he did according to his will and became great. So we're talking about this Darius and Cyrus combination of generals, Cyrus being the large horn, the Persian leader. He actually wore a ram's head studded with gold and precious stones. And their armies had banners and shields that had a ram on them. And in the signs of the zodiac, I told you the signs of the zodiac all point to scripture. In the zodiac, Aries is the ram, which represents Persia. Persian coins actually have a ram on them on one side. According to Josephus, the historian, in 332 BC, the high priest Jada heard Alexander the Great and his army was coming to destroy Jerusalem. He was on his way from the north down south, go through Israel on his way to destroy Egypt. And so he was going to destroy Jerusalem on his way down to Egypt. This high priest went out to meet Alexander, and he read him this very passage out of Daniel. It had been written 200 years earlier. And then he explained the passage to Alexander, and Alexander was so moved that he turned away from Jerusalem and he left it intact. And he went on south to Egypt and founded a great city that we know now as Alexandria. So Daniel's prophecy 200 years later actually saved Jerusalem. The history is just amazing in this. We could spend weeks and weeks and weeks just looking at the history. Our education system and the media try to change this history. They say Daniel didn't write this because he couldn't have known all of this detail. Duh, that's why it's prophecy. But we need to choose. We're either going to believe them, the History Channel and the rest of these fools, or we're going to believe God. And then if we believe God, we better educate our kids, because the world is trying to erase all of the history. Now in verse 5, and as I was considering, suddenly a male goat, which is Alexander the Great, came from the west, Greece, across the surface of the whole earth without touching the ground. Literally, Hebrews talking about very fast, moving quickly. Remember the leopard with that speed? We might say he's a turbo goat, or he's moving at warp speed for those guys that are still Trekkies. And the goat had a notable horn between his eyes. Then he came to the ram that had two horns, which I had seen standing beside the river, and he ran at him with furious power. Remember I said he hated these people. And I saw him confronting the ram. He was moved with rage against him, the Medes and Persians. He attacked the ram and broke its two horns. This would have been in 334 BC. There was no power in the ram to withstand him, but he cast him down to the ground and he trampled him, and there was no one that could deliver the ram from his hand. So just a little of the history. Alexander was a bookworm as a kid. His dad didn't think he'd grow up to accomplish anything, but he went ahead and had him tutored by Aristotle, who we've all heard of. When his dad died, Alexander was, I think, about 19. He decided to become a warrior and avenge his dad's death in war, especially against the Medes and Persians. Now, Alexander's mother told him that he was divine. He was actually the son of the gods, not his actual dad. And that stuff's big in ancient Greece, with Hercules and Zeus, and it goes on and on and on. On June 10th, 332 BC, Alexander died at the age of 33 years. Interesting, he's at the same age as Jesus. Some historians say he was poisoned. Others say he died of venereal disease. Others, malaria. Some say acute alcoholism. Others, he died of pneumonia after wandering out in the rain after a drunken orgy. I mean, nobody knows for sure. But they do have a poem, and it says, Jesus and Alexander died at 33. One lived and died for self. One died for you and me. The Greek died on a throne. The Jew died on a cross. One's life a triumph seemed, the other but a loss. One led vast armies forth, the other walked alone. One shed a whole world's blood, the other gave his own. Jesus and Alexander died at 33. One died in Babylon, and one on Calvary. One gained all for self, and one himself he gave. One conquered every tongue, the other every grave. The one made himself a god, the other made himself less than a god. The one lived but to blast, the other to bless. Jesus and Alexander died at 33. The Greek made all men slaves. The Jew made all men free. But just interesting how that far back they made this connection between these two and the obvious differences between them. And we also have to see here, God let Alexander the Great and Greece take over, going through this statue. We have Babylon, and we have the Medes Persians. Now we have Greece. Why do we have Greece in the silent period between the New and the Old Testaments? Because he wanted to use the Greek language for the New Testament because of its, it is such a precise language. We have one word for something, they have 7. And so they are much more sophisticated, that language. In Galatians 4:4, we're told, but when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his son, born of a woman, born under the law. So when everything was set up, and I think that's what we're seeing here now, we're going right through the stages of this statue. We're about to come to this second iteration of the Roman Empire. And he's about to send his son forth again. So this one-horned goat was the symbol of the Macedonians or the Greeks. Again, in the zodiac, it's the Capricorn. Capri means goat, and corn means horn. So the horn of the goat. That's the reference to it in Greece. Alex's goal was to bring about a new world order. So he wasn't the first. He's obviously not going to be the last. Verse 8, therefore the male goat grew very great, but when he became strong, in other words, had conquered the whole known world, the large horn, Alex, at the age of 33, was broken. And in its place, it's 4 notable ones. We looked at this earlier. Alexander's 4 generals, Cassander, Lysimachus, Seleucus, and Ptolemy. Kind of sounds like you're speaking in tongues. So after he died, he didn't have any children to leave control to. So he said, give it to the strongest. And it was divided over these four generals. And earlier we saw them pictured as a leopard with four heads and four wings. So they came up toward the four winds of heaven, and out of one of them came a little horn, which grew exceedingly great toward the south, toward the east, and towards the glorious land. So the glorious land is Israel, but glorious and land are both capitalized. And this is not the little horn Antichrist from the fourth or the Roman Empire. This is referring to Seleucus. Out of him came Antiochus IV Epiphanes. And I mentioned him before. From the third or the Grecian Empire. His name means the illustrious one or God manifest. And he'd be the one who desecrated the temple. He literally sacrificed a pig, spread its blood and guts all around the temple in Jerusalem, told the Jews to worship a statue of Jupiter or Zeus, depending which language. There'd be no more Sabbaths. There'd be no more scripture or the Bible, the Torah, no circumcision. Okay, that one's probably not too bad for all the guys. But it's a picture of the future Antichrist. By the way, the Jews called him, instead of Epiphanes, they called him Epiphanes, M-A-N-E-S, meaning the madman. So they mispronounced his name, basically calling him a madman. And it grew up to the host of heaven, and it cast down some of the host. Here it's typically used to describe an army. So a lot of time we think the host as angels, but it's like the host of the armies of heaven type of thing. And some of the stars, figuratively here, would be describing princes or leaders. And the normal word for star is aster. So this is a different word when it says host. To the ground and trampled them. Well, the persecution Daniel sees is about 386 years in advance of it actually occurring. Yet he describes all of these generals and when Alexander the Great dying, leaving them in power, this Antiochus Epiphanes IV rising up and being this first, or not, probably not the first, but a little Antichrist. We're told that many of Antichrists have been amongst us. Now he, Antiochus, even exalted himself as high as the prince, which is capitalized, referring to Jesus, of the host, the heavenly armies. And by him, Antiochus, the daily sacrifices were taken away, which is exactly what happened. And the place of God's sanctuary, his sanctuary, was cast down. Because of transgression, though, an army, the same word used above, was given over to the horn to oppose the daily sacrifices. And he cast truth down to the ground. He did all of this. Some say it means he practiced witchcraft and prospered. So the little Antichrist, Antiochus Epiphanes, did desecrate the temple. And so will the big Antichrist. We'll see in Daniel 9:27 next week. So again, it's a dual prophecy. It's, we see this here. Little horn comes out of Greece, not the former Roman Empire, but the prophecy has dual meanings and references. In Ecclesiastes 1:9, we see that which has been is what will be. That which is done is what will be done. And there is nothing new under the sun. Solomon told us that. So history repeats itself. We've heard that phrase before in our own language. In 2 Thessalonians 2:4, the Antichrist, who opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God or that is worship, so that he sits as God in the temple of God. And we've talked about that in the past in Revelations. There has to be a third temple. There's no temple today. And yet he's going to sit in a temple, and he's going to show himself that he is God. So the temple, as we're reading this, there was no temple when Daniel wrote this, and there's no temple today. Daniel the Babylon conquered Jerusalem, destroyed the temple, took Daniel as I think probably about 16-year-old kid with his friends and hauled them off with others to Babylon. And they came back and finished the job a number of years later and took the rest of the people captive that they didn't kill. So yet both of these antichrists were told will or did sit in temples and desecrate them. So we have this picture of these two different antichrists. You can look up the Temple Mount Institute online if you want to see the plans for the coming third temple. I just heard this week, you guys probably heard that there were 5 red heifers delivered from Texas to Israel. One had been determined not to be perfect after a period of time. As of yesterday, I heard that there are 3 of them that are still perfect. I don't know what happened with number 4. They've purchased land on the top of the Mount of Olives so that they can actually sacrifice one of these red heifers, and they're planning on doing it on Passover. So watch for all hell to break loose on this coming Passover in Israel. This may be when Iran or Hezbollah or the rest of these groups all attack Israel. Something's going to happen. And the people that call themselves Palestinians are claiming this is what Israel's trying to do. We need to keep our eyes open for that. So they have everything ready except the red heifers, and that's about to take place. And they need a red heifer. They need to sacrifice it, then mix the ashes of the red heifer with water. And then they use that to sprinkle all the priests and the Levites and the temple, the whole routine. It cleanses everything of sin. At least it used to. It doesn't anymore. Now, if Israel gives into the world today regarding the war against Hamas, they're never going to get approval to build the third temple. So that tells me that Israel's going to move ahead full speed against Hamas, probably against Hezbollah to the north, and against world opinion, and all the pressure being put on them by the United States. And then when that is all clear, that may be what triggers peacefulness coming to the area that could trigger Gog Magog. I'm not sure, but I believe that this is all leading up to the Antichrist arriving on the scene and coming up with a plan that approves a covenant or some kind of an agreement that's in place and strengthens it and allows the Jews to go ahead and build their third temple. Now, all of these things are falling right into place. Now, some people look at this, they say, well, the stars are angels, but Antiochus definitely didn't pull down and trample any angels that we know of. So that just kind of throws out the stars of the angels thing. It's referring to a host or an army. And finally, here, as I read this passage, I realize how much I despise the worldly elites. They do whatever they want. They have no regard for God or righteousness. They just seem to keep on prospering. And if you feel that way sometimes, read Psalm 73. Their end is not going to be good. But it is frustrating to watch how they prosper. Everything is going so well for them in life. And yet they do so much harm and damage. In verse 13, then I heard the Holy One speaking, and another Holy One said to that certain one who was speaking, how long will the vision be concerning the daily sacrifices and the transgression of desolation, the giving of both the sanctuary and the host to be trampled underfoot? So as we look at this, the Holy One is Kadosh. It refers to an angel or a saint. So this Holy One that's speaking would appear to be an angel. It says, how long? And I thought, how long do I ever ask that of God? How long is this going to go on? I mean, there's always an end. He always controls it. It happens exactly on the day he wants it to happen. So I've just stopped asking God, when is this going to happen and when's it going to end? Verse 14, and he said to me, and this one is stumper. He said to me, for 2,300 days, then the sanctuary shall be cleansed. So what the heck does that mean? Days in this in Hebrew is literally evenings and mornings. So it's saying 2,300 evenings and mornings. And that seems to be important. The Seventh-day Adventists, William Miller and Ellen White, use this passage to mean actual days, and so that they determined that the Messiah was going to return in the second coming in 1843, based on it being literal days from the time it was written. So, whoops, they missed it. It's not talking about years. However, if we look at this as a 24-hour day, an evening and a morning, you would cut it in half, and that would be 6.3 years roughly. The length of time that Antiochus did all his damage. He went from 9/6, 171 BC to 12/25, 164 BC. So I got to give a hat tip to Skip Heitzig, who actually broke this out. And this makes a lot of sense. Now, in Hebrew, it means Erev Hoker, evenings and mornings, referring to the evening and the morning sacrifices that were done. And that would make it 1,150 days, be 110 days short of 3.5 years. I was trying to see if somehow it was going to match that halfway point in the trib, but it didn't. So thanks a lot for clearing this up for me. But definitely it means something. And no one I read except for Skip seemed to know for sure. But I know this passage in general is referring to Greece. I'm guessing that he's right. It's referring to the Maccabees taking control over the Seleucid Empire, which is based on the writings of Josephus. It resulted in the Feast of Hanukkah, as we know it today. It was called the Festival of Lights in Jesus' time. Jesus referred to it in John 10, verse 22 and 23. So this was brought out on a study by Andy Woods and also by Todd Hampton. So quite a few of the commentators are narrowing in on these days. I think Skip and Andy are probably right. But I want to be careful with these things in a day where people have their own truths rather than the truth. I think Skip and Andy are right. The numbers seem to match. I can't say for certainty. In verse 15, then it happened when I, Daniel, here he says it again, had seen the vision and was seeking the meaning, or wanted understanding, that suddenly there stood before me one having the appearance of a man. And we've seen that before. It could be Jesus, could be Gabriel. I don't know right here. And then it said, and I heard a man's voice between the banks of the Ulai who called and said, Gabriel. So you have to guess it's Gabriel the archangel, who is God's angelic spokesperson. We saw him in the study of Luke. Make this man understand the vision. So somebody is telling Gabriel, and I'd have to guess it's the voice of Jesus, having an appearance of a man, much like we saw with Abraham. Make this man understand the vision. So he came near to where I stood, and when he came, I was afraid and fell on my face. But he said to me, understand, son of man, that the vision refers to the time of the end, pointing to the end of the Greece in Israel. Yet it foreshadows, we know, or points to the real end. So again, that double prophecy. He's given them a vision of this Mede-Persian Greece empires and how Greece brought the Mede-Persians to an end with this little Antichrist taking over. But he's also pointing to the end. And so it says here that Daniel seeks the meaning. I think God would like us to be more like Daniel. Seek the Lord, study scripture, gain the knowledge and understanding of the things of God. I'm trying hard. I'm gaining a greater appetite for studying it. to search out the matters. And the New Testament says to go from the milk to the meat of the word. I'm really trying to dig into this to see how this all fits from the Old Testament to the New Testament. In Proverbs 25:2, it says the glory of God to conceal a matter. It is the glory of God to conceal a matter, but the glory of a king is to search out a matter. I think that's what God wants for us to do. So this character, Antiochus Epiphanes, is pointing to the end, the Antichrist, one that is yet to come at the end of time, as well as the one that would come at the end of the Grecian Empire. Now, verse 18, as he was speaking with me, I was in a deep sleep with my face to the ground, but he touched me and stood me upright. And this was kind of interesting. In Hebrew, the phrase actually means stood me upright, means that he gave me comprehension, or literally he set me straight. So it's kind of like when somebody kind of sits you down and explains to you, they set you straight what something means. It's that kind of a picture. And he said, look, I am making known to you what shall happen in the later time of the indignation. For the appointed time, the end shall be. Prophetic. The ram which you saw having the two horns, they are the kings of Media, Darius, and Persia, Cyrus. And the male goat is the king of Greece, Alexander. The large horn that is between the eyes is the first king, Alexander. As for the broken horn, meaning the death of Alexander, and the four generals that stood up in its place, 4 kingdoms shall arise out of that nation, but not with the same power. So Alexander, like I said, he's said to have died of VD or booze or pneumonia. I don't know. The world just tells us we can do as we please. If it's your truth, live it out. And I think about God's warning to Cain, which we studied recently in Genesis 4. If you do well, you'll be accepted. And if you do not do well, sin lies at the door. And its desire is for you, but you should rule over it. So Alexander the Great, probably from the time he was 29 to 33, conquered the entire world and just killed himself. It said history says he literally cried because there were no more kingdoms to conquer. And like Cain, Alexander couldn't rule over his passions. After such a successful campaign, he died empty and broken. We either master sin or it's going to master us. And sadly for him, it came to an end. Now it says these 4 are not going to be with the same power. After Alexander left the kingdoms to these 4 feuding generals, and they just argued amongst themselves, fought against each other. 2 of them eventually dropped out, and then one went against the other. That's why Seleucus and Epiphanes came into power. And Jesus told us in Mark 3:25, a house divided against itself cannot stand. That's what happened to this Grecian Empire. That's what's happening in the United States today. We are so divided, it's absolutely coming apart at the seams. Now, this next part seems to have 2 targets in it. First, the things that Antiochus did, and second, what the final Antichrist will do. And the Ecclesiastes 1:9 tells us nothing new under the sun. I see this today as I study both Daniel and in Genesis. We see these same things repeating. So Antiochus is a prototype, if you will, or a mini-me of the coming Antichrist that we're going to see. And I think prior to this next verse, we've been looking at the history. Up to this point, this is everything that actually has happened now as we look back. Now we look into the future for us. So it says, verse 23, and in the latter time of their kingdom, when the transgressors have reached their fullness, in other words, sin is complete or maxed out, like in the days of Noah, a king shall arise, the Antichrist. So this would be talking about the end of sin. At the end of this generation, when the church is pulled away, the world is literally 100% sinners. That's all that's left. They've reached their fullness. Sin is complete. It's maxed out, as in the days of Noah when he saved them, just like he will save us. A king shall arise, the Antichrist. He'll have fierce features, a king of fierce countenance, we were told, who understands sinister schemes, literally means he's skilled in intrigue. So another picture maybe of this sorcery kind of thing, perhaps AI. His power shall be mighty, but not by his own power. We're told that he's indwelled by the dragon, Satan, and has Satan's power. He, this Antichrist or beast, shall destroy fearfully and shall prosper and thrive. He shall destroy the mighty and also the holy people. It would be the tribulation saints. And we see this happening at the midpoint when the mark of the beast comes about, Revelation 13:17. Take the mark of the beast and worship me, or you won't buy or sell, you'll be put to death. And so it says, through his cunning and shrewd policy, he's going to be super intelligent. Again, the reason why I believe AI is going to be involved, whether he's transhuman with a computer plugged into the back of his neck, like some of the pictures you see, or whether he has the AI at his disposal, it's basically there today. He shall cause deceit or craft to prosper under his rule. We have to remember in Genesis, Satan was easily able to fool a couple of perfect human beings. He's smarter than we are. He was smarter than Adam and Eve. He was able to trick her. And it says, and he shall exalt or magnify himself in his heart. You read those things in Isaiah 14:13 or Revelation 13:5. He shall destroy many in their prosperity or ease. We saw that in Revelation 6, the seal judgments. He shall even rise against the capital P, Prince of Princes, which is Jesus. That's why he's called the Antichrist or against Christ, Revelation 13. But he shall be broken without human hands, which means supernaturally. And we have to think at the last Gog-Magog war, Armageddon in Revelation story, the stone hitting the feet of Nebuchadnezzar's statue, supernatural. God is going to destroy the armies of Gog and Magog in Israel. Jesus is going to destroy Antichrist and his troops at the very end of time, at the end of the millennium. Jesus is going to destroy the false prophet and the Antichrist and throw them into the lake of fire at the end of the tribulation period. And they'll be there for 1,000 years waiting. When Satan gets thrown in, they're still there. So for the nihilists that think everybody's just going to go poof and disappear, obviously that isn't going to happen. So we have all of these pieces here, and it says, and the vision of the evenings and the mornings, which was told, is true. That's what will happen. And it makes me believe the evenings and the mornings and that number of days, there's more to it than what I've been able to find. And I'm going to keep looking for that to see if I can't figure out what the heck that is. But it's true. Therefore, seal up the vision, Daniel, preserve it, put it away, for it refers to many days in the future. So almost 400 days to the start of the New Testament period, the birth of Christ, and 2,400 years to the tribulation period, roughly. So he says, seal it up. This is far in the future. Interesting, the Apostle John and Revelation, God said, don't seal it. Remember? So he tells Daniel to seal it up. Now he tells the Apostle John in Revelation, don't seal it. Why the difference? Well, the Bible wasn't complete yet in Daniel's time. When John wrote Revelation, that was the last book of the Bible. It closed the book. John's prophecy now is very close. So it was okay to reveal revelation at that point. Now, question, John told that it should be taught in the church. Remember the first couple of chapters 2 and 3 of Revelation are letters to the churches. And then all from chapter 4 through the end of the book of Revelation is prophecy. And John told them to pass these letters around to all the churches. So why do so few pastors teach it today? It doesn't make any sense. Jesus told them to teach this. It talks about the heart. Proverbs 4:23, we're told to keep our hearts in all diligence. Our hearts are deceitfully wicked. And with our thoughts, where are we most likely to fall? Or just as a thought, when we're experiencing peace and security, like Israel at the end before we get into the tribulation, they're going to be living in peace and security. It's when everything seems to be going great, we really need to be careful, because it's when you're at ease that the enemy can sneak up on you and get you. You're not looking for it. You're not expecting it. So this vision of the evenings and the mornings, I can see this pertaining to Antiochus and the Maccabees. It makes sense. I can also see it pertaining to the Antichrist, but I'm not done searching it. I just can't connect the number of days to anything I've seen yet. So we're told he's going to achieve great power by subduing others. He'll rise to power by promising false security. He'll be intelligent and persuasive. He'll be controlled by another, Satan. He'll do miracles like Jesus. In 2 Thessalonians 2:9, we're said the coming of the lawless one is according to the working of Satan, with all powers, signs, and lying wonders. Power is dunamis in Matthew 11. Signs is Simeon in John 20, verse 30. Wonders is Teres, which is in Acts 2:2. He's going to repeat with power and signs and wonders a lot of what Jesus was able to do. Satan's going to have a lot of power. Does he have it today? I don't know that he has all that power. Maybe God is giving him the power for this period in the tribulation. I don't know. But can demonic spirits and Satan do miracles? Well, I've got a whole list of passages here that we could read where they do that very thing. Exodus is a perfect example with Pharaoh's magicians. But we know he's going to be an adversary of Israel and subjugate it to his authority. He'll rise up in opposition to the capital P prince of princes, Jesus, and his rule will be terminated by a divine judgment, which didn't happen to Epiphanes. He wasn't removed by divine judgment. He was removed by the Maccabees. So we're going to see more in chapters 9 and again in verse 11. And as I was studying, actually Chuck Missler discovered this. There are 33 references or allusions in the Old Testament to the Antichrist and 13 in the New Testament. So it's 46 references that he found. There could be even more, but he's pretty thorough. One interesting one to me is the Assyrian. He's referred to as the Assyrian, which means Iraq. It's part of the eastern leg of the old Roman Empire, which makes it interesting. You can read about this in Isaiah 10, verses 5 and 12, and also in Micah chapter 5, verses 5 and 8. And we're told he also is called the seed of Satan in Genesis 3:16. So these are a couple of really interesting descriptions of the Antichrist. Whether he could come from Iraq, perhaps a non-Muslim Iraqi, it's possible. Still be part of the Roman Empire. Verse 27, and I, Daniel, fainted and was sick, literally vomiting for days. Afterward, I arose and went about the king's business. I was astonished by the vision, but no one understood it. I can only imagine how hard this had to have been for Daniel. When all these years later, we look at this, and it's hard to understand statues and animals and beasts and clay toes. And I mean, it's just hard to grasp and understand all this stuff. But as we're getting closer, it is starting to make more and more sense. And between studying Revelation and now Daniel, these things should make us sick too. What do we do? Like Daniel, get back to the king's business. Share the gospel with as many people as we can so they can avoid avoid what's coming. So I asked myself, what do I do with this information? Would be confident God hasn't been wrong yet. He hasn't misled us yet. He's not going to going forward. So this stuff is coming. Live holy. I remember when Mom used to say, Dad's going to be home soon. And I was either scared to death or happy, depending on how Mom was acting. If we had done something wrong and she was angry, then I was scared to death because I knew we were going to get hammered. Third, be comforted and sorrowful. Comforted because we know where we're going. Sorrowful because we know people that may not be headed in the same direction as us. Fourth, be about God's business. Why does God have us studying these books? Why did we go through Revelation and the end time prophecies and studying the rapture? Why are we going through Daniel now? And then we go back to the book of Genesis, and what do we see? A lot of this is being laid out from the third book or third chapter in Genesis. I mean, it's amazing. And he led me to start studying Luke, which we put on pause for right now. But Luke goes through this whole thing in chapter 21, I believe. So, yeah, 21. So basically, we're studying these things. He wants to motivate us to get out, to understand what's happening, to understand where we are in time, and to share it with people who are lost. He told us in Luke 19:13, occupy till I come. In 2 Corinthians 5:15, he died for all, that those who live should no longer live for themselves, but for him who died for them and was raised again. I think that's why he's taking us through these things. And all the more reason we need to just stick to this, study these passages, try to understand the best we can, and then be able to share it with people. And that's all we can do. Like I said last week, we can't save anybody. All we can do is share the gospel with them. The Holy Spirit does the saving. So next week, we're going to look at chapter 9. That's going to be the 70-week prophecy. It literally is the key that pulls all of this end time thing together. It really makes sense when you understand the 70-week prophecy. So we'll spend that whole time. Might take even a little bit more than an hour, but not enough to go for 2 weeks. So I'll try to get it done, get Genesis done early and get started on Daniel a little bit quicker next time. So that's it for this week, guys, for Genesis first and now Daniel. Look forward to seeing you again next week. Have a great week. We'll see you again soon.
Hey, Rick, thank you. You have a good week too.
Hey, you guys too. Good to see you.
Bye-bye.
Almost,
Bye-bye.
almost see you. All right, Lise, we're done.
She's not there.
I'll get something.
Oh. Okay.